Gary Mackay, production designer for Cowboy Bebop. This is a live action adaptation of the anime series. And so had you watched the anime before joining the show?
I had. I'd been like not an Uber fan. There's some serious Uber fans out there that obviously, but I was aware of the show. I'd watched the show, and then a long time ago, and it was like a lovely reintroduction to get the opportunity to come and work on it. It was pretty exciting and pretty mind-blowing opportunity, to be honest.
Mhm. Well, when you're adapting like a beloved, like hallowed IP like this, like how do you balance, being faithful to the original while doing your own thing?
I guess all of our departments, in costume design, production design, all of us had that, and obviously the writers and producers and directors had that to deal with as well. And I think because we, most of us were such huge fans of the original anyway, that we felt like a real obligation to do as well as we could for the existing fans. So whether it was, we didn't change, we used things like the Swordfish Spike's iconic spaceship, his zip craft, and we didn't divert very far from it, apart from to perhaps make it look like it functions in a real way, and figure out how to do that. But they're such beautiful designs anyway. It was the perfect kicking off point. We were lucky enough to get sort of a lovely series of sort of 600 sketches from the original designers, like not colored sketches, just loose, obviously, when they were doing all their thinking and working. Was it Kimitoshi Yamane, the original mechanical designer? So we had sort of 600 drawings from the original designer that we could mine through and look for and understand. And that was just exciting. That was just to have that base of beautiful design already is really a dream. So I guess what we tried to do was be faithful to that, like for the Bebop itself as well. Obviously, we tried to make, there's aspects of that when you see the inside of the Bebop jet spaceship, you'll see the handrails are sort of in the feel of the original sketch. And there's even big hatches and doorways that are in the feel of the original anime. But we definitely made it feel more lived in, obviously. A lot more broken and sort of run down to give it that sort of bachelor pad style. And then we got to put all the characters' backstory with our lovely set decorator, Annika Bota, to put in the Jet's stereo, his jazz collection, Spike's training equipment, all that stuff that collects up in the ship. So I hope we just added more layers and more backstory of characters into what we did.
I love the Bebop design because I was like, I want to hang out there. Like this is like cool, but it's also like the color palettes and the schemes are so fun. Like it's like a faded orange couch you have in like the living area. But so how big was that like set for the Bebop? Like what did you guys build from scratch?
It was huge, actually. It was surprisingly large, and it was interesting as we were designing it. Our producer, director, and showrunner would come through and go, "Can we make it like a couple of feet wider? Can we make it?" And we were kind of looking at it going, like, it's the size of a basketball court already. Are you sure? And so it got pretty large in the end. It would be, it would be 90 or 100 feet long from one end of the set to the other. And it would be, it'd be like 40 feet, 35, 40 feet wide. So it's pretty big. And then that's just the upstairs layer where we see most of the story. And then we built a separate set on the same stage of the bedroom, bathroom, corridors, other areas as well. But it was important to make it a good scale for it's fast turnaround, well, reasonably fast turnaround television. It's not like we've got weeks and weeks to film these scenes. We've got pretty tough schedule. And so the fact was that the camera and the crew and could move around it pretty rapidly and pretty easily. It had a lot of wild walls, to help that, but we often didn't need to move them. They could get through that whole set pretty easily.
Yeah, so like all the corridors and the rooms were connected, and it was like practical. Yeah,
it really was very, very practical. Yeah.
Oh, the show is so fun, and it's like a mix of so many different genres, and obviously what was part of the original as well. But there's like action, sci-fi, like a space western, and noir, and it also takes place in the future. But a lot of the looks and like the props and decor are kind of contemporary or retro. Like there's like a VCR in like a late episode. So it's not like super advanced in the way you think of like futurism, and it's also not a dystopian future. So how do you go about designing that world and incorporating those like retro elements?
I mean, again, they gave us such a great lead, because we had that sort of source material to work from. So, in many episodes, it looked very much like downtown Hong Kong. It looked like Wan Chai or Kowloon, so often in scenes in the bebop world and on Tharsis. So, and I've worked there and know that city really well. So you immediately know what it looks like in real and what it inspired them in Japan. The noir episode, that obviously the original Bebop team had a huge passion for movie making and movie makers, and so they were referring back to their favorite movies from the 70s, from the 80s, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Midnight Cowboy, all sorts of things they were referring back to, and they're all things that we as filmmakers adore and love as well. So it's pretty dreamy, because we're homaging the original anime, which is homaging these amazing movies from such great periods that had beautiful cars, sort of long wandering shots and wide angles and all sorts of really interesting things going on. So we mine the same sources that they did, and hope that we find the same feel that they were going for. So it was really lovely, because each episode is often in a different color palette, because it is purely a noir episode, or it's really a cowboy episode. So it was pretty lovely that episode by episode we had such diverse things to do and deal with.
Yeah, well, in the same vein, like there's they go to different places in every episode, because it's like they're chasing different bounties. So you have a different location every episode, like different sets, sometimes interior, sometimes exterior. So how exciting and also challenging was that for you?
Super challenging, really. I think we got up to about 130 sets and locations to do over the 10 episodes. So it was heart-stopping at times, and it's the age-old saying of there's only one way to eat an elephant, and you just had to just try and do what, you'd look ahead, but you really could concentrate on what was coming up in the next month and just work your way through it. And as you are just treading water, you can start looking at what's coming next month. And so we did have a good prep period, and we did get to develop a lot of color palette and a lot of style of these different worlds. Right up front with, I started this project with Grant Major, a fantastic New Zealand designer, and he started off designing, and then I took over from him to do episode 3 through to 10. And Grant and I have worked and known each other for many, many years. He's been really pivotal in my life and my career. And so it was really lovely to work with him, for him to hand off. He went to work on Jane Campion's Power of the Dog, and we were still 6 weeks out from shooting. So we hadn't even started shooting when Grant moved to another project, but we'd had this wonderful prep time together with a great bunch of concept artists, a great bunch of art directors. And it was one of those fortunate situations where we felt like we'd had some time to develop and not just run at it at a crazy pace. Then it became a crazy pace. 10 weeks out, you're going, oh my God, there's so much to build. And I guess the other fortune we had was John Cho having his accident. So we went into a stand down period, which was like this sort of breather around. We were sort of shooting episode 3 and 4, and we just had this pause where we could actually consolidate and think about the rest of the series. And really, I had this luxury of designing, almost solo a lot of the time, and just being able to really distill and talk through with the showrunners and the directors and distill. And that, it was really unfortunate, but it was kind of fortunate at the same time. It gave us
like a blessing in disguise.
It was a blessing in disguise. That's right. Yeah.
Well, the show hasn't officially been renewed for a second season. I mean, it hasn't premiered as we're talking about this, but the showrunners have talked about like their plans for season 2. So would you be returning, and like what kind of ideas do you have?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. You'd have to. I'd love to do it again. It's been one of the most amazing projects I've been lucky enough to work on because of its diversity, and its diversity of color and texture. And, we made an effort to even bring in more cultures. That, the original anime had a lot of cultures, and we've really made an effort to reference even more cultural diversity in the locations that we go to. So that is it's like every episode is a different movie, and it's a real delight and a real, I feel so fortunate. So I'd be totally up for doing it all over again.
There's so much more space to explore.
That's right.
Characters we haven't met yet from.
And look, I'm lucky. I've been in the UK. I've just finished designing a film here in London, and now I'm traveling around. I've been lucky enough to pop over to France recently, and I'll be going back there in a couple of weeks. And my well of creativity I just feel like it's just pouring in there. I'm just seeing so much architecture and so much beauty and amazing material that is all inspirational to me. So
You're ready for season 2.
I'm super ready. Yeah, let me at it.
Right. Well, Gary, it's great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back in a little bit.
Lovely.
Thank you. Nelson Coates, production designer for The Morning Show. Season 2 went through a journey because you guys were filming pre-COVID and then obviously shut down, and then they rewrote the whole season to incorporate COVID. So what kind of adjustments did you have to make after that? Because you also joined the show in season 2 on the first season.
Right. When Mimi Leader, the producing director, joined season 1, we had just finished the Ruth Bader Ginsburg movie On the Basis of Sex. And the Morning Show already had a team in place before she joined. So I went on to do Home Before Dark with John Chu in Vancouver, and then In the Heights. And then she said, is there any way you'd be interested in jumping on board season 2? And I love Mimi. We've worked together for like 16, 18 years. So it was kind of going to be an interesting challenge. They had a very extensive story arc that we had started prepping, going to Algeria and Morocco and all these other places that we were doing a deep dive in how to accomplish all that when in the background, the COVID pandemic started. And we actually were the very first show in Hollywood to shut down. And by the end of that day, all the Apple shows shut down, and the next day, the industry, and the next day, California. So we had filmed 3.5 weeks of material. The show starts literally right after the first season. And we use maybe a day and a half of that 3.5 weeks of filming in the new season, because we did such a major pivot. And of course, a show set in New York, shooting in LA. The first season shot several days to get their New York material. But all of a sudden, when we came back, the scripts were way huge. And we all thought that in COVID and working in the pandemic, that we would have manageable sized spaces and manageable sized events. And of course, the first script starts with New Year's Eve in Times Square, and which couldn't be more crazy. And so we built that in a parking lot in Santa Anita, and built 2 stories of Times Square. I did a full model of the whole Times Square area and our set that we were going to build. And then we had to figure out how to keep our stars segregated from background and how to keep everybody safe and work in all those spaces. But we were also playing catch up, because even though there had been a shutdown, there had been so many ideas about what to do with the storyline that we only had a couple of scripts when we started back to filming. What we did know was that none of the actors really wanted to go out on location. And on top of that, a lot of cities in the Los Angeles area had a moratorium on filming because they didn't know what was happening with the pandemic. So we needed huge luxury estates and big office suites, and we couldn't go to Pasadena or Beverly Hills or you name it. So we started just drilling down and actually taking over more stages at Sony, and we built a 12,000 square foot office complex with all the offices and bullpens and hallways and elevators. And then all of the walls fly and different graphics and different furniture come in, and it becomes another floor with additional, 12,000 square feet of space. And all of that from pencil to shooting on that set was 8.5 weeks. So 8.5 weeks to design and build and furnish. It was like hair on fire. And then of course, then we started getting the inkling of what the rest of the season was going to have, which included scenes in Wuhan and Beijing and a train station, the train, and then all over the United States. And it became, how do we mine LA for any possible element to become all these countries? I mean, we're doing streets in Milan and and a villa and all these streets in Lake Como. And so it was kind of crazy because we had to do it all within the confines of LA. So it was quite a big.
I mean, the irony of just having to be in a bubble, but the season is global. Well, yeah, like Italy, the huge subplot of the season was Mitch in Italy, and you guys shot that in LA area. So tell me about his Californian Italian villa, his Lake Como villa in California.
Well, Mimi and Carrier and the showrunner, they sat me down and said, okay, we have this crazy idea. We want to be in Italy, but we know we can't go. We can't even go to New York because there was no way to quarantine actors and be able to film there. So we immediately went on the hunt. And again, the best villas, the best Italianate architecture is in San Marino and Pasadena and Beverly Hills, and none of them allowed any filming. So we expanded our search, and I found a 1920s house on property of a high school in Sierra Madre that a famous early architect in California history, William Neff, had built supposedly on the early plans of a Michelangelo house designed in Florence. And it over time had been given over as a donation to a high school that then had it as an event center. So it was painted and just bright white, and it was pretty stripped and devoid of any there was no furniture, no finishes of any sort, as well as no landscaping. And so to come in and figure out, okay, what are the views, where does this situate on Lake Como, what views are we going to have from where, and then trying to create a very luxe environment that has kind of an intergenerational feel with a lot of layers. So it looks as if this has been in a family for years and years and years. So it doesn't look like they're set up for the magazine, and yet it has the Ruhlman pieces that we literally built to look like Ruhlman pieces, and the Biedermeier elements, and you have the flat screen TV in one room, but you have the tube screen in another, because why do we need to keep buying things? It just has that huge multi-layered, very Italian feel to it. Every surface was redone. We did a lot of faux stone work, a lot of gardens and fountains and things, even beyond what has made the cut. And it was quite fun and spectacular to try to create a real environment and showing the actors, okay, this is what you're looking at when you're going over here, and you can't stand beyond this because that will be a balcony that drops to nothing. And
you're looking out at Lake Como right now.
Right, exactly. So doing that aspect was great, and also then figuring out the streets of Piazza Cavour and how to actually realize that. We had there's literally 2 streets in Los Angeles that have cobblestone near the top, it's the Pico House near downtown. And it has enough Italianate structure there that I did a photocomp of what I wanted things to look like, pitched it to everyone, and they went, oh my gosh, can we do that? And so we clad the buildings that were not Italianate and all the restaurants and signage and dressing. And we did certain elements to break up our blue screen for the lake. And in the distance where we couldn't actually build facades, we were creating the dressing inside the stores photographically, as well as signage and ATMs and bank fronts. And we were placing them into windows so it looked like the layers of what's happening across the street. And then you throw some tables and chairs in front of it. And it really created a much wider world than just what we could afford to dress and build. I mean, literally we had 3 days to install streets, 2 full streets of
like all the storefronts and yeah. Wow. Yeah. Because you need to add depth to it to make.
And there's a lot of walk and talks. No one's just standing around in this store. It's like, let's walk, let's keep talking. So it's a lot of mileage, a lot of shoe leather.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I noticed was, I think this may be because of like the structure you talked about with like the 2 levels and then the rotating walls and stuff. But like it seemed like there were a lot of more like bigger views this season, like in the studio and everything with like windows.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I guess that's also part of like updating a look from season to season, even though you didn't work on the first season. So I guess like if the show comes back for a 3rd season, like what would you return and like what would you like to accomplish in a season 3?
Well, we accomplished so much. I mean, season 2 is huge. Every view is big. The sets are really big. I mean, we filled 4 stages to the walls, including the largest stage in Hollywood with the huge office complex. And I totally redid Alex's penthouse and the returning Bradley's hotel room with then a brand new suite for Corey. So everything got touched and redone. The show itself, the show within a show, we have jumped time. So with that 7 months of story time, we redid the show within a show set with different levels and lighting capabilities and graphics.
A lot more screens.
Like a lot more screens. A huge kitchen to create an odd bump into space for characters, so that they actually could be walking down the hall and bump into a character that they might not normally be into. All the dressing rooms got redone. The elevator lobbies. Just Mimi said, "Go for it. Let's dial it up." So, it really grew quite a bit. And we were even doing at one point 2 complete episodes doubled up on top of each other. And so it was quite the craziness to accomplish that scale.
Mm-hmm. And so season 3, would you
so
have any ideas?
No one's announced a season 3 yet. So we'll see what happens. Mimi and I are talking over here, and we'll see what and what.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd worked with Reese previously, and to work with her and Jennifer, as well as this amazing cast, was really gratifying. I mean, Reese walked into Billy's office the first time and she goes, "Oh my gosh," because I've been in this business a long time and I've never seen a set like this. And I've also pitched to all these executives and none of them have an office this nice, So that was pretty nice of her to say. And everybody got to really play in these spaces in a way that I think was super fun for them.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Nelson, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back in a little bit.
Thank you.
Rich Murray, set decorator for Only Murders in the Building. First of all, are you a big true crime aficionado like these 3 characters on the show?
Actually, I'm not, although a handful of us on the team are. I'm more of a comedy fan.
Mm-hmm. Are you into true crime now after this, working on the show?
I haven't yet had the time really to indulge. It's been a busy 2 years since the COVID's.
Mm-hmm. Well, so when you're joining a show like this, where like the setting is so important, not to say it's not important on like other projects, but it's like, it's in the title, and it's like the murders in the building. These people are in this building and apartment solving the case. Like, what does that like put more pressure on you to make sure like the sets really pop to the viewer?
Oh yeah, totally. We had we started with Vintage Architectural Digest and a lot of period magazines and books. And so we knew we had to be very specific about what we were doing, both from an architectural standpoint to make sure it felt like the building here in New York, but then also from the set deck side, each character had to be so distinct and so well defined. So we were very much focused on color palette and texture and style. And so we, of course, with the influence of the sort of big designers of the last 30 years, or the big decorators of the last 30 years here in New York, we reached out to Carlton Varney and got some custom wallpaper. We reached out, we saw a lot of Mario Boada and Bonnie Williams, and even the Coco Chanel living room in her apartment in Paris, was a sort of a little bit of a jumping off point for us for Oliver's sofa and the symmetry in his living room. So it was a big challenge to make sure it felt like New York and it felt real, and everything was built. And of course, we were shooting this, in shields and masks and everything during COVID. So we couldn't go out on location. And when your two stars are in their 70s, it's a very big concern. And the health and safety was a very exciting challenge for us, in addition to managing these looks. To make them look really great for New York City.
Yeah, it's definitely an amalgamation of those like classic fancy New York City apartment buildings that take up a whole city block.
Yeah.
Did you guys like just draft your own blueprint of the Arconia and like where everybody's apartment is situated? Because you guys in the show, they make references to like the A-line apartments. And
right. We had that all very well planned out. We sort of understood the architecture of the building and then shrunk it down to the long hallway and the vestibules that we could build. And then we defined every apartment by so Tim Kono and Jan's apartments were the same, and in the same entry in the same lobby. So we had and the story reflects that as well, because it's all about the mystery of where people are coming from and where are they going. It's kind of funny. Recently, we've all sort of gotten into the online world of the fan base and sort of the people following it, and it's mind blowing to me that there are fans who are just as focused on who lives above whom and in which line of the building.
They've drafted their own blueprint of the Arconia.
They're out there. It's kind of terrifying knowing that that every detail that we do. And of course, I mean, the biggest part of what we did from the set deck side was sort of all the inside jokes and Easter eggs and the fun and the joy of it being a comedy as well was sort of paramount in my approach and in the producer's approach and in the writer's approach. There you see these bits all the times on the fan websites as well. Like people freeze frame, take screen grabs and post about like the little jokes that they're seeing all over. And so that was part of the challenge as well, was to make it fun. And to make it interesting and exciting, such that you could screen grab it and see, there's a joke in the name of the woman who's, being waked at the funeral home, in episode 7. There's just so many inside jokes. It's just a lot of fun, especially with the guest stars that we did.
Well, like you said, like all like 3 of the main characters, Charles, Oliver's, and Mabel's apartments, they tell you so much about each of their characters. And like Charles' apartment is so clean and neat, and it's like a throwback to his Brazos years almost, like when he was doing really well. And he's also kind of like the blandest and like the straight man of the trio. And Oliver's is like very theatrical, a lot more bold colors and golds. His dining room is like so over the top. And Mabel's is like, it's a work in progress, like her. It's under construction. So can you talk about like designing each of their apartments?
Well, because Steve Martin was so involved with his with his apartment, and he's a huge art collector and big in the art scene here in New York. We settled in on specific artists for him. Like there's the painting of the Alex Katz painting in his living room, where it's the back of a woman's head. In his apartment, obviously, it's about the women that leave him and his loneliness and his sort of isolation in his world. Then we also see another painting in the family room area, which is essentially sort of a throwback to like a Starsky and Hutch type of cop car vehicle. It was in his Brazos room where he had his poster and everything. So it was very specific about the art for him, and that sort of was also sort of a higher level or elevated level of like the furniture was each piece was a choice and had a name and was designed, and then we reupholstered and did what we did to integrate everything. So his was much more of a carefully sculpted and assembled and curated, if you want to use that word. But like for Oliver, his story was all about his past. His space is all about the past. We gave him the backstory that his father was very involved in the opera world, and so he was always sort of struggling and striving to get to that point where he was as successful and as well regarded as his father, and never really got there. So you see the wallpaper in the dining room, but there are chairs and architectural artifacts from, say, like the old Metropolitan Opera House here in New York, scattered throughout his apartment. And then as a theater kid myself and coming from the theater, I had boxes and boxes and boxes, and Kurt Beach, our designer as well, we all had boxes of scripts and theater books and theater history that we just brought in, from our storage and brought it into the show. There was one point when John Hoffman, our writer and executive producer and the creator, was giggling with us because we had an original Time magazine from 1971, on Oliver's stage, and it was the review and the opening weekend of the musical Follies. So everything had a link to a history point where like we could consider that to have been Oliver's first show in New York, when he went to his first show, and it was like the first thing for him. So we had playbills and everything all over his space. And then for Mabel, of course we don't know a lot about Mabel, but we know her aunt was of wealth, and in the city it was a very much it felt like that sort of late 70s, early 80s kind of house, with a lot of bright color, a lot of fun and funk to it. So we left that up in the chandeliers and in the curtains in the living room and the bedroom. But then all of it was stripped back, and it really gives us a chance to see where she's going, I hope, in season 2. We're just started on season 2 now, but we don't know where Mabel's apartment's going. But with
she started painting murals and everything towards season,
right. So it's weirdly sort of like, how much is this just her processing what's going on in the building and her time in the building and her relationship with all of her friends, including her dead one, her dead friend. And so I don't think that that's going to live there, as but we don't know. It's only early in season 2.
Well, in the 5th, 6th episode, like they go to her childhood home and her childhood bedroom, much more decorated. And I think everyone's favorite detail is the cardboard cutout of Elliot's
That's
paper.
all scripted. All of that is all of the.
So did you just order that off of Amazon?
I think we actually made it, but
you made it. Wow.
I think we made it in-house, but like we really took a leap with that room, because we're struggling with like, who's the 15-year-old Mabel then? Who's the 13-year-old Mabel? And how do we see that growth in her? And we only saw probably a good 3/4 of the room, but it was full of art and life and craft and just joy and exuberance that you see in kids' rooms. But from her, it was a very sort of specific layer of intricate detail that everyone walking into these sets was just blown away every time they walked in, because it was just such a level of detail that came, started with Kurt and the architecture of the rooms and the spaces, and it started with the scripts and the writers, because John and the creator and all the other actors and everyone else was just so, we were all so involved, and it was always a mind meld of like questions and exciting, dialogue back and forth among us to get to the right answer of what these spaces were and who these people are. And so we had so much fun with it. And I think it comes across that there's a lot of great energy and a lot of inside jokes and a lot of fun.
Oh, for sure. Well, so like, is there something, any of those details that you guys put in that didn't make the final cut? Just whether or not it was captured on camera or not, like just like a room or like something like under a table that you put in there and it just never made it on camera.
That got cut. There was one element. We did have a painting of one of the guest sort of stars, in their apartment, that they had seen. Everybody was approved and everybody liked it, and then it became a sort of a joke or a bone or a point of comedy because it's a comedy, right? So everybody's cracking jokes on everything, and all of a sudden everybody was like, well, maybe we shouldn't have that painting up. So we took that down and we had replacements. We were ready. But a lot of times there are a lot of little inside jokes that people don't see until they're there in the space and they're sort of peeking around and poking around, touching things. We have one thing that Kurt did mention, Kurt Beach, the designer, mentioned in another bit, that we have a closet for all of Winnie the dog's costumes.
Oliver would have that for Winnie.
Of course, right?
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So we have,
Winnie's his baby.
Of course. So we have an entire closet costume for the dog. And the sort of inside joke that we worked into it was, okay, let's make these costumes all based on characters of either Steve Martin or Martin Short from previous lifetimes and movies. So we have a little arrow through the head, for the dog in dog scale size. We have a dentist's outfit. We have three amigos. We have all of the, Father of the Bride. We have a tuxedo for the, we have all of those characters sort of in dog scale in place, and everybody giggles. It's just such a fun show and such a fun environment.
We need to see that in season 2, no matter what happens. More
I don't think I have control over that.
You need to go back to them after this and pitch it.
It's really fun. It's a lot of fun, and everyone sort of gets that that sort of charge out of knowing that all of us, from John, writing the jokes in, and we're taking those jokes and dealing with them in a physical sort of decorative way. We're making them happen and come alive. And everybody sort of gets off on that on set. It's kind of great.
Yeah. Well, Rich, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Much.
And wait for season 2. More Winnie.
Yeah.
We'll see you back in a little bit. Thank you. Ondrej Nekvasil, production designer for The Wheel of Time. This is a very popular book series. Were you familiar with the books before you joined the show?
Actually, I wasn't. I didn't read them before. I read the first book once. I had a first meeting with the producer. So first time I heard about the possible show, I read over the Christmas. I read the first book, but I didn't read the books before I started working on the show. Mm-hmm. So actually, I was kind of connected with that story only once when I started working on the show.
Mm-hmm. Is that something you like to do when you're unfamiliar with the source material? You want to like look at it and read it?
So it's what is specific is that of course I always like the primer source, which was the book, but of course what was quite important for me was the script, which is slightly different than the scripts, which are slightly different than the books. And they are like combining the details from the different books together to creating the world which is there. So in one moment I'm become confusing by the books because I kind of fixing the story from the books, and suddenly I got the scripts and immediately I'm saying, oh, maybe that direction was the better for in the book. So I'm in some point I'm like I stop reading the books and I'm just focusing on the scripts and working with the scripts mostly.
Mhm.
But there was no like a visual materials connected with the books, because there was no like illustrations or illustrator involved in the books, and there were also the only kind of visual thing was the map of the world, which was created by the Robert Jordan, writer, and that was it, you know. And after that, there are some fun arts, but we never followed the fun art, so we were really focusing on the book. And what was our advantage, that we had a very good researchers, and she was so specific about like she knows the book so well that she is actually able to tell you, you know, that this detail is appear in the book 3 and in the book 10, in the book 8, and she was kind of like our Wikipedia of the story, so we can always like ask her, we have that prop, and we have that specific prop, is that appearing only in this book, or we will need it later, and do we have any more description of that, or we are in this room, do we have any more description than this chapter? And she was always like a very helpful to help us to give us the descriptions. But the description in the book was the kind of our key source, you know, for our visual concept.
Mhm. Well, the book fans, like, they've waited a long time for an adaptation, and like I feel like, you know, any fan of any book series, like they have in their minds like what
Yeah.
like certain like places and, you know, rooms and whatever look like. So do you keep that in mind when you're designing and adapting a book?
You know, like as I said, like we were like really turning to the book. You know, the book was the key thing for us. So when we had a description of the place, we use the book, and of course we have to make it possible, like production wise, that we, you know, we couldn't build like as the scale of as is described in the book. So we have to always think about the practical part of it, how we will make it work for our show and for our schedule. But in general, of course, like there are some visions of like mostly regarding the props, and some people could be disappointed that some props look different than they thought. It's quite possible like that people didn't please everybody, but yeah, it's we tried our best. That's what I can say.
Yeah. Well, it's the story is set in an unnamed time and place. So what kind of leeway does that give you as a production designer?
So what was like the key point for our designs and the whole thinking about the visual part of the world was actually the way how the whole show is casted. So we have a very diverse cast, and when we had a very first meeting with our showrunner Rafe Judkins, that we discussed that actually in our ward, that's our specific ward, that ward and all the people mixed so many times, so they don't have to. They are not talking about the ethnics and the races, because in this ward these words doesn't exist. So there's no ethnics and races. There are only places that you are coming from this town or that town, but it doesn't matter what is the color of your skin, because you have a small village in the middle of the mountains, and suddenly you have a very diverse people living in that village, but it's completely normal. And it's normal because that word turning so many times that actually the cast and the people turning as well, and they travel and they, you know, move from the place to place. So you have a, you know, village in the middle of the mountains, and suddenly you have a different, from our point of view, different ethnics, but from their point of view, there are no different ethnics. And we did the same thing that we like when we did the, let's say, the mountain village, that we put together all the interesting details from the different type of mountain village, starting from Alps, going through, you know, like in Russia to the Alpine village in Japan and to China, and we kind of create our world, which is very specific for our show. That's we always establish the rules for the different environment, and but we were like picking the pieces from all around the world to make it happen, you know, to make the kind of visual and consistent look of the place. So, and it was like not starting just with the architecture, but also with the materials and with the details, how they work with the materials and how they use the, you know, let's say color, how they use the pattern and the texture on the rooms and on the spaces, yeah, and also on the furniture and the props as well. So we always like decide, okay, here they do have a lot of trees, so there'll be like more like a wooden structures, and the rocks, so there'll be rocks and wood, and somewhere else there'll be more like a clay and the straw. So we kind of combine these ideas together, and that's how we create the world for each town or each place or each village which we meet on the way.
Mhm.
Now, Jeff.
Like the characters are traveling in every
Yes.
episode, and a lot of it is outdoors. And I know you guys shot in the Czech Republic. So what went into like scouting the right locations for the right landscapes? Because sometimes there's snow, sometimes it's like a wooded area, and sometimes it's just kind of like rural. So how did you go into looking for like the proper locations?
Yeah, so we had some kind of a map of like a mental map of the journey. So we know what we would like to achieve in each places, and we shot in Czech Republic, we shot in Slovenia, we shot in Croatia, and we shot partly in the Canary Islands. So we get like a different type of landscapes for our show and different kind of environment. And we established like, okay, here is that these are the forests. That is more like a kind of sandstones and the forest, and this is more like the limestone and the white, and more like oaks forest than the pine forest. So we kind of establish always the journey and the area where we are moving on by the nature as well. And after we scouted kind of interesting spots, which take some time, because actually every single place we were shooting, it's protected by the law, because everything what is in Europe, like everything what looks like a nice nature, it's always protected by the law, because there's not so many like a wild nature here. So technically it took a long time to get all these like permissions done. You know, we were shooting in a few national parks. It was very tricky to get there, to get all these like permission works. And, you know, there was really like a limited amount of crew and limited amount of people who can step up. You know, like in Slovenia, we were in the first zone of the national park. We got a very special permission just for the like a, you know, very limited crew to be there in like a 2,200 meters. And all of that was kind of process. But I think that we found a really nice spots all around Europe for that, or in these three countries, which can give us the specific look for the show and for the journey.
Mm-hmm.
I believe so. Yeah.
So what went into designing the White Tower, and like how much of that did you guys build, and like how many parts of it were there?
So actually the White Tower was like I should say the most complicated task for us, because there was so many you know, different influences and different opinions about the look of it. We ended up with the kind of very distinctive architecture of the temple, which is mostly inspired by some Indian temples and some details of the Indian cities, of like a really like a medieval Indian cities. And we did a lot of resources for a lot of versions, and I should say no other set has so many versions and so many like choices like the White Tower. I should say like that in one point, I think that we counted and we had like a 35 different concept arts next to each other, looking for the right spot of it. And after that, we built as much as possible all the interiors, of course, and all the you know, kind of key sets. And plus we had so the White Tower took like 3 stages to maybe 4, I should say, maybe 4 stages to film all the interiors, and the rest was CG, which we did like usually we are like designing all the stuff and giving that to the visual effects team with some notes and with some references what we are looking for to get how is the look like and what we would like to get from that look of the White Tower. But it was the most complicated one, because there was so many attention in the book, and we were looking for the right style for it, and I hope that we get it, you know.
Oh, for sure. Like there's definitely visually it's very striking in certain scenes with it, because it's like there's so much like the marble, and it just really pops off the screen. Well, you guys you're currently shooting the 2nd season, right?
Yeah, we are in the middle of the 2nd season at the moment. Yeah, we are about like finishing, because we are shooting in blocks, like that every director is shooting 2 episodes as a one block, which is I think that our only chance, because of the locations and getting all these permissions done. So we are now in the middle of the 2nd season. Yeah, almost ready to finish the 2nd block. Not yet.
I can't wait to see it. Well, Ondrej, thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking with you. And we'll see you back in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Fox, production designer for the White Lotus. I feel like this was the ultimate pandemic show because it was ordered and filmed a year ago this time. So can you just talk about the circumstances that went into getting the show off the ground?
Well, when I got the call about the job, they'd already chosen the 4 seasons. I think HBO had approached Mike White about, can you maybe have something in your bag of tricks that might work for small pandemic, non-giant succession type shooting? And he had literally been thinking about a resort idea, not this one, and he rewrote it. But that's sort of where it came from, because I literally got on a plane after being in my house for 6 months, basically. I mean, it was prime pandemic time and the hotel was closed. We were, for half of it, we were just there in the bubble.
So, and you had to do your quarantine at the hotel as well, right? Like the 4 seasons was where you like lived and worked.
Yeah, we
Right.
got to the hotel. There were like 7 people. I often say it was like The Shining by the Sea. And I get there and I have to then quarantine for like 10 days in my room, which you really could not complain about. You were gazing out at Hawaii. And I was just in there. I had all this fabric I had shipped from Hawaii, samples, and I'm literally taping it to you know, the curtains, trying to figure out, because I'm going to get out of here in 10 days and have to design a set like that. So I would be taping everything up in my room, different fabrics for which set. And I would send them to my art director who was in quarantine. He would do a little photoshopping. Then my decorator who was in LA would send me pictures of furniture that coincided. It was just the weirdest.
What is it like? I mean, I guess like, you know, it's weird to be in quarantine and like having to work like that and not seeing people, like you're just like emailing down the hall. But I like, you know, working there or like living there, I feel like you also get to observe how like the facilities operate as well, right?
Well, it's weird. I mean, every job is different, as we just heard from so many great production designers. But this job was really different in that you can like walk on your set every day for a month, 2 months before you're shooting there. You're like so in it. It was strange. But the facility was not running for the first half. And that was really interesting. It was literally like, at first it was 10 of us, then the actors arrived, then the extras arrived, and then there were about 40 of us. And then halfway through our time there, the hotel opened. And you're like, wow, so this is how it worked. Because these kind of vast empty lobbies, it seemed kind of like old folks' homes suddenly became like hip places with bands and lighting. And so it was a unique experience, to say the least.
I love to talk about the aesthetics for each of the suites of the guests there, because I love like how you went for like prints and like patterns as well, because it like the whole resort like obviously is for like wealthy people, but there is also something like gauche about it, like the prints, and it fits the tone of the show as well. So can you talk about like how you landed on those like patterns? And obviously, you know, the palm suite has a lot of palms, and pineapple suite has a lot of pineapples.
They sure do. It's such a funny job. So when we had my first call with Mike, you know, he's like, I don't know, do we leave it? Because the hotel rooms are really they're lovely, but they're banal because 50 different types of people have to stay in there. So there's nothing, you know, over the head. So we're on the phone. We're talking about the Madonna Inn meets the Four Seasons. Do you know the Madonna Inn? It's crazy, tacky place on the coast of California with rock rooms. And then we talked about, we had about Rich and Kitsch and, you know, do we just make it mundane or do we go for it? And I've said, let's go for it. And so the pineapple and the palm were scripted because of that character's whole need to be in the better room. So like Jennifer's suite, the hibiscus suite, that came, Mike was great. He's like, well, if you find a better look, we can change the name of the room. So I just really started with fabric. And I had all these Hawaiian fabrics sent to me in LA. and I left swatches for my decorator. And then it just kept evolving from those fabrics. And then Alex, our great costume designer, would say, I hear you're using a lot of patterns. And I'm like, I hear you're using a lot of patterns. And then our patterns met and we were very excited. So it just became that kind of bold thing. And so there was, in each room, there was the headboard and the drapes, which was mostly the starting point of that room. And then we would build the color palette off of that, except the Tradewind suite actually started with the artwork, which brought the blues, because that was a famous, I found that Herb Canet is a famous 70s artist. And I'm like, oh my God, I love this stuff. And so once we got permission to use this, then that color and those patterns built from that, which also totally tied into what happened with Quinn the Kid, which at one point Mike and I are like, are we too on the nose with the, the boats? And we said, no, let's go for it.
Well, you also have like Connie Britton's character, like rearranging the room for her Zoom. So.
Listen, her picking up that turtle, rearranging was scripted, but picking up that turtle was not. So when I saw that on the show, I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic.
So how much were you allowed to change in the suites?
Well, we emptied them out completely and, just totally tried to create a bare canvas. That was also what was so exciting. You had so many things you couldn't do. And sometimes that's the mother of invention, Normally you go into a job with a ton of references. Here you just had to say, here's my references, this room, I'm going to work from it. And so no paint, which I think was a blessing. So it was really just getting as much of what existed in the room out, working with built-ins you couldn't get rid of, like the headboards we were recovering. I brought in coincidentally, I had a draper that lived in Hawaii who I'd worked with in Santa Fe of all things. And she moved in and just sewed 24 hours a day. So it was really all about fabric and furniture.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also kind of interesting because you talked about this before, like how usually hotel rooms aren't like really over the top, like decorated, because it needs to be like for everyone, to be able to stay there. So did you try to, I guess, personalize a little bit? I guess like when like the guests stay there, they personalize it themselves with like their luggage and everything, and like
that's for sure. The luggage and the props were picked for every room, but as you kind of got to know the characters, the pineapple was always going to be the pineapple, but the thing that became interesting is the Palm Suite is literally one of the best rooms in the hotel. It has the best view. And the suite that it became the Pineapple Suite is really low ceilings. It's it's got like a bunch of rooms you didn't see, and it's for families. And you have no view. And yet, because of his obsession with, I want what's best, I want more, then the room started building on that. And I'm like, you want more, you're going to get more. There's so many pineapples in that room that you don't even, I'm like, we're just going to keep pushing it. And so it became more about, instead of just like, oh, this looks good, that looks good, it became more like, you're giving up a beautiful room with beautiful live greens, with the best view of the ocean, for a room with a low ceiling and an over-the-top pineapple decor.
I thought that was like the cheeky payoff of it, because it's like the build up to seeing this pineapple suite, like the entire season's like, is he ever going to get there? Are we going to see it? And we do. And it's like, I would have just stayed in the other room.
100%. So so you totally got that too. And then of course, Jennifer's room, her color palette was selected, but as we got to know her character, her room got a little quirkier, and some of the set dressing and there's like a kind of a weird Medusa head with hibiscus growing out of it. Her bathroom is a mess, so it's funny because normally when you do a production design, a lot of rooms are so character driven, right? You want to do the layers and and see if you can see there, but in starting this, you didn't think that would ever be the case. It's a hotel. But as the process wore on, rooms became a little more specific to the story and to the character, just in subtle little ways. And that was kind of a neat, interesting discovery. Well,
I guess the perhaps the most like personalized room is Armand's office. A lot happens in there. So how did you go about like, designing that?
Well, it's first trying to figure out which room. I mean, you're in a hotel. My gold room, my prop storage room was a giant ballroom, and so you're picking between ballrooms and then history of Hawaii. And it just became like, he's a quirky guy. So, he had the sexy hula lamp, he had the colorful couch. There's a lot of old paintings of young surfers and things like that. And just continuing with the warmth and the greens, because he's also a great guy. He just takes it a little bit in one direction. And then, of course, you want to create all the opportunities for what we knew what was going to happen in there.
Yeah, it also seems like a very like accessible area. Like it's not hard to like get to. Yeah.
No, you can literally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So are you going to return for season 2? It's a new location.
I don't know where it's going to be, but it's exciting. It's like, where do you go from that? I mean, all we know, I guess we all know, is that Jennifer's returning, because that was in the press, but that's really all I know so far. But of course, I would love to do it again.
Awesome. All right. Well, Laura, it's great speaking with you. Thank you so much. Welcome to our Meet the Experts TV production design panel. We're joined by Gary Mackay from Cowboy Bebop, Nelson Coates from The Morning Show, Rich Murray from Only Murders in the Building, Ondrej Nekvasil from The Wheel of Time, and Laura Fox from The White Lotus. Thank you all for being here. This might be maybe a very long answer from you guys, but what is a typical day like for you as a production designer? Nelson, you're laughing.
There are no typical days when designing. Every day, I think it's why we all love this career. Every day is unexpected, no matter how it's planned, and that's exciting. I think we all live off that adrenaline.
Mm-hmm. Ondrej, what about you?
No, I just I have the same feeling. Like I just every time when I'm going to the work or to the office, I'm feeling that I would like to go to the office. So I don't have a feeling that okay, I would like to stay home. That's kind of my feeling. And usually I'm starting with the construction guys because they are quite early. So that I'm starting like walking through the stages first, then going to the workshop, and I'm going back to the office, talking with my crew, and that's how the day started, and now there's a lot of meetings. And at the end of the day, like now I'm able to start like designing something because finally I'm, kind of free, and nobody's having any like meetings or emails. Everybody is gone. So there's a quiet office now and I can start working. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gary, what about you?
Yeah, very much the same. And that's what is such a joy about the work we do, I think, is I love dealing with construction. I love the scenic department. I love the prop making and the set dressing department. Each of those is, it's so much fun working with each one of those teams and, encouraging them to bring their creative brains into the process as well. And sort of this melding of minds and problem solving. It's a really special and really lovely role to play. So, similar. We'll end up going around a bunch of construction sites, different sets, through the stages, through the back lot, over to the scenic workshop. How's this looking? Is this what you are after? Set deck department is above the scenic department for me, and so I'll go through all of their work. Prop department is next door. I have a little team that are making zip craft, making little everyday spaceships off in the corner, and then back to the office and over to the office for the meetings, through the design room. So it's a joy. Mm-hmm. Long days, but they're fantastic days.
Laura, what about you?
Normally, I would agree with what everybody just said. This job would begin with a swim in the ocean with the turtles, my art director. I would also usually run into the director, and then all of those things.
You're just making everyone jealous right now. So.
How often does that happen that I can say that? Never.
I think one of the things that was totally different about this particular season and working in the pandemic, for those of us, especially in the United States, we were having to try to do creative things that need tactile and color exactness over computers, which is radically different. And so in presenting things to, let's say, Reese and Jennifer, not only would I have meetings on Zoom doing presentations, but then having to do duplicate work because you're having to present boards that are shipped to their houses with the fabrics and the colors and things so that they have something to talk to you about. So it added multiple levels, not just the protection for COVID, but actually double the work in that regard.
Rich, what about you?
Yeah, my days are, as a decorator, my days are pretty much like that as well. I start in the shops generally. I'm pulling dressing and pulling fabrics and pulling things together. And then as the designers know, it's always a bunch of meetings and scouts and everything, which, and a million people asking questions. So you can barely get anything done until it's way past everyone else's bedtime. But that's when all the fun starts.
Well, Nelson, you just referenced like all the COVID constraints, but even like pre-COVID or, you know, without COVID, like you guys can also be constrained by like budget or time or, you know, just like new scripts. So, and I feel like that also forces you to be more creative, like Laura, you were talking about before. So what's the tightest constraint you've worked under and how did you adapt to it? Laura?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I just think every job is different, to be honest. Here I was constrained by what the hotel offered as opposed to, you know, here's a big empty stage, fill it with a design you've come up with. So for this job, I think the biggest constraint was just trying to tell the story, not overdo it, and work within what existed in a place like the Four Seasons and what you could do.
Gary?
For me on Bebop, I think it was, it went from the thought that it would be a 70% location-based show, and it became like a 80% set design, set built backlot show.
Wow.
That happened very quickly. Both, well, I mean, we'd started shooting before COVID even existed, and it had already happened. There was just the ability to take such a big circus, you know, such a big crew into the city and take over the city in the way you need to. In New Zealand and Auckland at the moment, the city's having a whole bunch of new infrastructure built. So every time you dream up a location to go look at, it would have there'd be a huge demolition site across the road. So we did spend a lot of time figuring out, and in the end, we built a backlot, and that was a saving grace, and it was fantastic. And I mean, we had all the time we needed, and we had all the chance to do what we want when we wanted, to do the stunts we wanted, whether it was day or night. You know, Bebop's full of a lot of gunfire and a lot of stunt work and a lot of car stunts, and so it actually worked in our favor in the end. But it was certainly not the show that was pitched when we started.
Ondrej, what about you?
I think that yeah, you know, that what we hear is like I can sign everything what I just hear. Is that I think the most important for me is to find the right balance between like you have all this information, you have the schedule, you have the budget, you have like you know where you are, what are your locations, possible locations, what you can do, how big is the crew, and you have to do that kind of right kind of estimate what you can afford to build, what you can afford to dress, what you can afford to, you know, if you are able to push the production to travel, you know, in distance locations, to stay overnight somewhere, and all of that kind of together. Because the thing which I'm always aware that I don't want to have like a show where one set is great and perfect, and I don't have enough money or enough time to build another set. So I would like to always try to keep all the sets equally, knowing like that some of them will be more important, but just keep the money and the, you know, and the time for every single piece of the show or a piece of the film, that actually everything is treated in the same kind of level, you know. So that's kind of like to find that balance, dividing the, you know, the time, dividing the money, like where we will spend the money for the construction, where it's more like a set deck, where is more props, and that kind of balance is the trickiest always.
Rich, what about you?
Yeah, the difficulties we had were mostly COVID related this time around on this show, because we almost always ended up having to change schedule. And that can be, as everyone here knows, is kind of a nightmare when you're switching up what sets you're shooting. For our show, it was all built. For the most part, we only had like 1 or 2 locations per episode, so we weren't out very much at all. And we didn't have the flexibility on our swings, on the stages where we built all of our swing sets. Again, you had to be in zone A in terms of COVID. And so we had to have all of our set dressers and all of the scenics and all of the carpenters testing 3 times a week to enough of them to be able to build on set if they were also going to shoot on that same set that same day. So we ended up breaking our teams into 2 and splitting the shifts. So it was like a 4 a.m. shift where people would come in early, paint and build and dress. And then probably they'd come in like 5 or 6 p.m. after they had mostly been done shooting for the day. It was really tough negotiating, who was going to be able to get what done. And that happened every block for us because in every episode we had a different like hero character, a different guest star. So we had to build that entire living room or the entire major set that person was in, and that became really tough if you're shooting on that stage for 10 hours a day anyway. Mm-hmm. But so we split the shifts and wiggled it around, but it mostly fell to the scenics and the dressers at that point because the architecture was up. The windows are the windows in the building, and sometimes we just changed out some of the hardware, but it was a lot of work from our part, but we pulled it off and we split the shift and everyone does it. It's great.
Yeah. Nelson?
I think one of the things that's really changed for episodic in the era of streaming is the fact that for network, we used to do an hour-long show. It was really only about 42 minutes. And now it's a full 60 minutes of work with the same amount of prep and the same amount of shoot time. So that in itself is a lot. So you're really doing the equivalent of 5 features when you're doing a limited series of 10 shows. It's an enormous amount of work to pull off fast. Most of us here do features as well, and the challenge of not having scripts and working at this speed, creating this volume of content is quite interesting. But in addition to the COVID protocols, one of the challenges of going and doing blocks and blocks of street dressing during COVID was all these companies were closed and you couldn't find the reps for those locations or they wouldn't be in that day. And so the added complexity of just getting the most mundane approval was really challenging. And then getting people in and just being able to dress blocks and blocks of things. Or as Rich was saying, being in the same space and making sure that your airflow was great with the rigging crews and the dressing crews and the construction crews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you need to dress someone's storefront and you can't reach them.
Yeah, we're also about to all hit the situation where we're going to suffer from lack of materials and, materials moving around the world. This is something that productions are going to have to take into consideration is, ordering the timber that you would think would turn up next week is not going to be available for 3 months. So going to have to run out of that far ahead.
We've run out of 2x4s and 2x6s here in Rhode Island. We're shooting Hocus Pocus too, and it's wacky. You would think, oh, it's just 2x4s, it's just 2x6s, and they're not available.
Yeah. Supply chains are in a mess, so it's got to be considered really.
I think I just paid 3 times what I normally paid for like a wall-to-wall carpet for a room.
Yeah. And the construction teams I've been working with here in London, they say in the last 18 months, their supplies have gone up 300%. So, most of their materials. So it's very interesting time, and
high demand and low supply. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not particularly for like your shows right now, but like, have you ever had a design you really had to fight for to be included in any of your projects in your career? Nelson, you're nodding.
Well, we had one of the things I really wanted to do was give Juliana Margulies's character in the morning show an equal weight kind of space to Alex's penthouse, Jennifer Aniston's penthouse. And without doing yet more modern spaces, I wanted to have like an Upper East Side apartment and a mid-block beautiful townhouse. And just trying to get that accomplished. Most friends I know who have that kind of situation have moved their living quarters or their master to the first floor so they can bust out the back of the building and have access to the gardens. And I really had to fight for the gardens because everyone said, that's not in the script. We're just in the bedroom and the sitting area. And I said, but what makes her at the same visual level and at the same wealth porn kind of, look is being able to look out at this expanse and then see the backs of the other buildings. And it also tells you you're on the Upper East Side. And that took quite a bit of doing to convince. And by the time it was underway, all of a sudden they started writing for that. And so you see the inside and outside, and it creates that opulence that you need. Otherwise, visually, it would have been way out of balance.
Yeah, and it tells you so much about her as well. Like she's this like legendary anchor at the show, Yeah. So, Laura, what about you?
On my first movie, 500 Days of Summer, there was a scene where this architect character was mourning his girlfriend and he was supposed to paint her picture. And I thought he would never do that. And I pitched a chalkboard idea and the director said, no. I said, okay, I'll make it work. So I did both versions really well. And then 3 days later, he goes, let's do the chalkboard version. So since then, I don't like to be a salesperson ever. So I always just, if I disagree strongly story-wise, I just try and figure out the best way to present that and let them choose. And usually it's never a fight. And if it's a lateral side move, I'm open because I think there's a lot of good ideas. So I try not to ever have to sell someone something they don't believe in, but I try and present what I believe to be the best idea.
I love the chalkboard in that movie, and then there's part of a great montage at the end. So
well, that's like Nelson was just saying, and then it grew into like more. So that's how it goes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ondrej, what about you?
It's on every project you have something that you want to make, and somehow it doesn't fit, or it's a cut from the script or something. On the first season, we had like one moment when we had like a kind of scene in the middle of the forest, and I pitched the idea like that they are like staying overnight. In the middle of the forest, they're like a big oak, like a very let's say a few 100 years old oak, which is massive, that you can go into the trunk, which is like it's not like the whole tree, only like a first let's say 40 feet of that tree, and you can go in and you can sleep inside the trunk, so it's kind of like a complicated build to build something like that. And I think that we had a kind of very nice design. It does work very nice for the scene and for the story. And unfortunately, producers cut it as it's too expensive for the just few days in a forest. And I think that was really like a good touch, like that you have something amazing. It was really inspired by the existing trees, only that because of the shoot we have to build it. But it was like one of the sets that I was like a kind of sorry that we didn't make it, because I think it has a kind of good vibe, that for the whole show and for that whole scene, so we ended up in some cave, instead of it. But yeah, it's sometimes happened that you have some plans and like the producers, if they are cutting the budget of scenes, they say, okay, this is too much. You don't want to spend this money for that scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gary, what about you?
I'm thinking back to a feature I did earlier in the year, where I had to build a visitor center in a redwood forest in California, where pretty much it's a thriller movie where the entire movie is set. Inside, outside, the car park outside the visitor center, in the snow. So we ended up building a studio set of all of that, and we built all the redwoods, the forest. We shot on location the set of redwoods we have in New Zealand, in a place called Rotorua as well. But 4 of the 6.5 weeks were on the stage in our set forest, car park, and the visitor center itself, which had to burst into flames. And well, spoiler alert. But in that set, because we were spending so much time in it with this core cast, a real lovely ensemble cast, I wanted to make the set in the shape of almost like a trident. So it had the 3 branches and the 3 windows all looked out into what we'd built in the studio, into the trees, into the car park, and into the trees and rocks on the 3rd side. And so that there's a whole bunch of scenes played around central areas of the set, that the walls behind and the roof, there's always lines and perspective moving away from you rather than a flat wall and a flat wall. And I really had to do a lot of convincing that yes, it's not typical, but here's examples of it. And I really believe in this, and I had to work really hard to have them in the end they went with my design, which I was really grateful for. And then to be halfway through shooting and for the director to sort of just tap you on the shoulder as you're standing beside the monitor and go, you know what, you were right. Thanks for that.
That was a win for you. Yeah.
That was a win. Yeah. And it's, and so you have to pick your battles. And you really have to pick your battles. How much does it matter? How important is it? And how hard are you going to fight for it? Yeah.
Rich, what about you?
I tend to have to pick the battle over elements that are, I think, pushing it a little too far. Laura mentioned earlier about on the nose a bit about set deck, and so many times you never notice it unless the camera decides it wants to see it because you put it there. Especially about for instance, in Teddy Demas's apartment, there is a Greek key in everything, on everything. It's in the fireplace, it's in the curtains, it's in the bar, it's in the woodwork, it's painted, it's just everywhere. You never see it on TV. You watch the episode, you never see that. So I'm often fighting for that. And I think the one big one that I had to fight, at least on this last season, because neon's so cliche in Rockstar apartment, we had Sting's apartment, and I'm like, I gotta find the way of selling the excitement of what we're doing with this. So we went through a lot of different designs of the neon, and it was a red neon, of course, it's Sting. And then I pulled up the Roxanne album cover, or the single cover, and looked at the way the OX was a heart and an X. And I'm like, that's the way to sell the neon, is make it an XOOX neon on his back wall, in that same shape and the same flavor and the same hand as the album cover. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh yeah, well, of course we'll do that now. It was a matter of figuring out which way to sell the secret, and make it sort of special for him and very focused. And I think if you tell the story of how it got there and what it is and why it's important, most, and production designers are great about, oh yeah, that's, of course, let's go there with that. But like producers and the directors and sometimes even the stars, you just have to sort of wink and nod and tell them the story. And then that's, I sort of get that. Yeah. I sort of get a good response that way.
All the fans are going to rewatch the season now to look for those keys.
All the fans have already written all of this. They have found everything. It's crazy amazing. And it only encourages us to go even crazier with it. It's so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all for being here today. It was great speaking with all of you, and congratulations on all of your projects.
Thank you so
much. Thank you.
It's been great being with you.
Yeah.